I did it. The gems. I understand them. I've become one of the gems. I get it. I was so stupid. I was so blind. This whole time I didn't see the gems. I understand. Hey everyone, it's Allie, and today I'm about to make your pillar attribute stacking Gemling Legionnaire insane. I have sat here and stared at every support in the game, and my brain has expanded. I've cooked. I understand the game. I am one with the support gems. Today, we're going to talk about a massive increase to your ability to clear, as well as a massive increase to your single target DPS that I thought were never achievable in our build, but well, when GG gives you support gems, you find a way to abuse them and get 70% more single target damage, which massively completely outclasses Black Sun Crest and makes 3 dragons the correct helmet to use in attribute stacking builds. We won! That's all I have to say here, is that we won and Black Sun Crest is just worse. Let me show you how. As always, the mobile link will be updated with all this information as well. So if you like a written version of everything that we have to go over today, you can find it in the description below. Today's update will be pretty information dense as there are quite a lot of things to go over. So stick with me through it and let's get into it. All of this is going to revolve around 3 dragons. Now, a lot of other content creators might be playing Black Sun in this build. I've had a lot of people ask me, why aren't we playing Black Sun? My guiding principle as a content creator when it comes to making builds is to try and make a build as comfortable and as jank free as possible. A lot of other content creators might try to simply just go for the highest damage possible, even if it means you have to do a 19-button Konami code to do so. And they might add really cringe things into builds, such as illusions with dodge rolling to then remove resonance, to then just save 5 passive points, but to make your life horrible on, right? A lot of content creators like to do that. A guiding principle for me when it comes to making builds is I'm okay with a build being 85 to 90% as optimal as it could be if it means it's substantially comfier, it uses less buttons, it is less complex, and it's just simpler to play. For me personally, that's what I enjoy in a build, so that's what I'm going to try to do in my builds. But at the same time, I feel like that's what a lot of people would also enjoy. So with that said, a lot of people were asking me, why aren't we playing Black Sun Crest? Because it's should be more damage, right? It's 15% increased attributes. And I did agree with that. And I did think we were going to go Black Sun Crest in the end. But what I ended up figuring out, because of the gems, was that 3 dragons actually will give you more damage than Black Sun Crest ever would, while making your build a hell of a lot comfier because we get the all res from 3 dragons, making our resistance problems easier to deal with. And we get to keep the laning damage can freeze, making it so all bosses are basically just permanently CC'd. And then everything in the map is also basically permanently frozen, making any sort of high-end content they do just that much nicer. This video is going to be split into 2 parts. First, we're going to talk about the single target damage and what we did to basically break it. And then we're going to talk about the clear, and we're going to talk about what we did to, well, basically break that as well. Previously in our build, we were only considering the lane damage can out-freeze portion of 3 dragons, and we're basically completely ignoring the fire and cold portion. What I ended up figuring out last night was, well, what if we didn't ignore the fire and cold portions of it and tried to play around with them? The holy grail of single target damage increase in this build would be to find a way for us to shock. Shocking is a very large DPS multiplier, and if we can shock, we can then run laning exposure for an even larger multiplier on top of that. In our case, because our lane damage can shock, we have to now do fire damage, and I just completely discarded it and just thought there was no way for us to ever do enough fire damage to realistically shock a boss. Well, we have found the way. We are now going to be including Volcanic skin into our build. This is going to add 8% of all damage you do, and given we're doing quite a lot of base damage due to Hand of Wisdom in action, this will be quite a lot of extra damage as fire damage. Now, picking this up is going to be a little bit annoying as we have to spend 5 passive points on this. And what I ended up doing to get this is I went and completely got rid of both acceleration and flash storm from my build. In a higher budget version of this, what I recommend for you to do would be to get a Megalomaniac with Volcanic skin on it, allowing you to get those 5 passive points back, and then you can put them back into acceleration and flash storm. With this, we are now able to do a pretty large amount of fire damage. One issue that arose with us potentially ever converting our damage around to be able to utilize 3 dragons better was that Lightning Rod is one of the most crucial portions of our build, and we cannot convert because Lightning Rod does not get converted. Lightning Rod makes it so all of our non-crits are lucky, meaning their damage is rolled twice and the higher number is picked. Because lightning damage has a massive range to it, Lightning Rods comes out to about a 30 to 40% DPS increase. If I was to convert all my lightning damage to something like cold, for example, with a Brotherhood ring, the conversion would happen first, and because all my damage is now cold, Lightning Rod does not get applied, but because we are scaling lightning damage through Hand of Wisdom in action, which has a typical lightning damage range of extremely low end, extremely high end, our cold damage would have exactly the same damage range, but Lightning Rod wouldn't apply to it. The thing about Volcanic skin is that it's damage as extra, which happens at the end of the calculation, meaning our lightning damage would hit a target, lightning rod would apply, and then the final damage roll post lightning rod is what is then going to be volcanic skinned into fire damage. This means that volcanic skin is highly efficient at giving us more fire damage. And well, with this, we can now abuse our old friend Tempest spell. Bear with me here as we're about to get into some real nerd shit. So, Tempest spell has a very interesting tooltip in how it works. It will deal 30% more damage per elemental ailment you apply onto it. This means you want it to put as many ailments as you can. Given Tempest spell is the majority of our single target damage, we ideally want to do literally everything to it. What it also does is it converts 60% of its base physical damage, because there's no conversion otherwise, into the corresponding damage type of each ailment. Because it's 60% conversion, if I have 2 ailments on it, it will 50-50 convert into both. This means we would ideally only want to shock it and then do something else, so half the damage is lightning, which then gets applied from lightning rod. But with 3 dragons, this is either a bug or this is just how it's intended to work. I think it's a bug though. Tempest spell changes the damage conversion that it does based around 3 dragons. That means in our current playstyle, we are doing lightning damage, which is freezing the bell, and that freeze is then converting the physical over to lightning instead of converting it to cold. At the same time, we have Ice Bite on our Tempest Flurry, which would proc when we freeze the bell, which then contributes to igniting through 3 dragons, which then causes the Tempest spell to be ignited, but that ignite on the Tempest spell doesn't make it now irradiate fire damage, because then we would just have shocks for free. No, instead makes it do cold damage, which is why we can freeze bosses so easily. 3 dragons seems to completely mess with how Tempest spell works as well in terms of what it converts to based off of the ailment on it, which is really interesting, and we can potentially abuse it to do what we want it to do. So with us running Volcanic Skin, with us now doing fire damage, we can now use fire damage to shock the bell, and that shock not only will give it 30% more damage because it has an extra ailment on it, but it'll now make it radiate a very large fire hit because Tempest spell does a stupid amount of damage, giving us the ability to do very large fire hits out of a tiny little 8% roll, which, mind you, all of the damage the Tempest spell is doing is now also giving you 8% extra damage with fire, meaning it's only even higher, allowing us to suddenly do fire hits large enough to very easily shock bosses. Because we're now able to do this, we can now run a lightning exposure on our Tempest spell, which gives us access to both shock and lightning exposure at the same time. Shock on its own was a 20% damage multiplier, which was amazing, but exposure is another 20% on top of that, just giving us 40% free damage that we never had access to before in any single target scenario. Because the bell gains 30% more damage per ailment, and we can now apply a 3rd ailment onto it, which we never had access to before. That also has to be factored in, given Tempest spells the majority of our single target damage, and it could easily be said that we now gain about a 60% or so DPS increase for literally just picking up Volcanic Skin. You thought that's it. You thought this can't get any crazier. You're wrong. We can then add in Volcanic Mark onto our Hand of Shayula, which we're pressing already for conductivity, to now apply Volcanic Mark onto an enemy, which it lasts 8 seconds, which is more than enough given we want to press Hand of Shayula every 8 seconds anyways, and it makes it so the boss is 50% more susceptible to shocks, make it even easier to put a shock on an enemy to begin with, and more importantly, because GG thought this was a good idea, gives you 45% increased shock effect on the marked target, making it so the shock doesn't give you 20% more damage, it gives you almost 30% more damage. So in total, for just picking up Volcanic Skin, we now do somewhere around 60 to 65% more boss damage than we were doing previously. Thanks, GG, and thank you 3 dragons for being silly. Now, due to all of these changes, there's going to be quite a lot of support gem changes that could be happening. There's a little bit too many for me to mention in one place, so I'd recommend for you to do is to come over to the HoI written guide and to scroll down slightly over to the build variant section of the guide, and then from here to either stay on the normal HoI setup, which is the Stormwave version of the build, or to swap over to the Tempest Flurry version of the setup, which will change the whole written guide around to show you all the relevant information for that. If you scroll down to the skill gem section, this will show you the proper support links, and I'd recommend taking a second to read through all this, as quite a lot of things have changed. The same goes if you're playing Stormwave, where you just save the normal HoI setup, and everything will be updated here to reflect that. One thing you might notice is that the normal Stormwave version does not have the Herald of Thunder, Herald of Ice tech that we're going to be discussing in the next section. I have made the decision to not include it for Stormwave because Stormwave already has pretty good clear as it is, and it's way too difficult to actually fit in due to the fact that the Stormwave version also needs to properly 6-link a Stormwave, which puts way too much socket pressure, as it's very difficult to also 6-link the Herald of Ice and Herald of Thunder properly with Stormwave still being in the build. Realistically, you only need the extra clear speed increase from Herald of Thunder for the Tempest Flurry version of the build, as it doesn't have the screen-wide clear that Stormwave does. Now, let's get into the really fun part, which is going to be your clear. What we can also do, along with this, is we can incorporate the same line of thinking into our Herald of Ice. A lot of builds are currently running a Herald of Ice, Herald of Thunder setup where the Herald of Ice is exploding and then they're trying to add a little bit of lightning damage to that explosion to then shock enemies with it, to then trigger Herald of Thunder, which then those builds try to add a little bit of cold damage to then make it freeze enemies to trigger Herald of Ice, basically creating an infinite loop through every single monster that they encounter. In our build, we would have liked to do this, but we can't because, again, 3 dragons makes it basically impossible to shock. As you've seen in the Tempest build setup, we now have access to it through Volcanic skin. Now, I will say this is not going to feel super, super insane until maybe around 600 to 700 intelligence or so. At around 300 to 400 int, it'll definitely feel really good. You'll definitely notice it, but it will not be 100% consistent until higher intelligence levels due to, well, the supports that we have to run. Volcanic skin is not going to be enough to guarantee shocks on enemies. Because of that, on Herald of Ice, we are now going to be running a fire infusion, which, yes, overall reduce the damage of it, but doesn't matter. Herald of Ice was overkilling so hard anyways that they're still overkilling really hard. And this is going to give us a large chunk of the lightning damage that Herald of Ice was doing in the first place as fire damage instead, which then gives us a really big base load to work with to try and create shocks for 3 dragons. Now, it seems like conduction is bugged. I've attempted to run it quite a lot and it literally seems like it does nothing with 3 dragons. So we unfortunately can't add that in to effectively double the fire damage that we do. But instead, we're going to add in a coursing current as our second link on our Herald of Ice. So whenever we do create a shock through Herald of Ice, everything on the screen, because this 2.5 meter radius does get affected by the AoE on your Pillar of the Cage God, immediately becomes shocked, making this whole combo feel substantially more consistent. From there, because all we care about is to get more damage on the Herald of Ice, to increase the fire damage as much as we can, to guarantee that we create a shock, we're going to add in a primal armament, a cold mastery, and then finally a magnified effect just to make the AoE size even bigger. This should then create quite a lot of shocks fairly often, and you'll definitely notice this at lower intelligence levels in very high density maps. So then we can add in a Herald of Thunder into our build. Now, the thing about adding this Herald of Thunder in is that it's going to be a little bit annoying to do. Currently, we are running Combat Frenzy, Herald of Ice, and then a third aura, whether it's either Grim Feast or Wind Dancer, and we don't have any additional spirit. What we're going to do is we're going to now go and find ourselves a 3 dragons that has a additional spirit corrupt on it. You're going to either look for a plus 20 or higher 3 dragons on a budget, and then you're going to either remove your clarity or your precision, and then the plus 20 plus the 10 from you're removing that aura is going to give you enough to run Herald of Ice, Herald of Thunder, Combat Frenzy, and either Grim Feast or Wind Dancer. And then eventually at a higher budget level, you're going to try to get yourself a 3 dragons with 30 spirit or higher, which would then give you that 10 spirit back to be able to run either precision or clarity as well. Ideally, try to get yourself just a 20 spirit or higher helmet and then focus on getting yourself a high all elemental res roll instead, just so you don't have any sort of resistance issues. And then once you get something like Grand Spectrums into your build, the all res roll on 3 dragons shouldn't really matter. So you just buy yourself the cheapest plus 30 spirit helmet if you do want to upgrade the build with a clarity or precision. For Herald of Thunder, the links are going to be fairly simple. We just want to do as much damage as possible. It's going to become what the main portion of the clear is going to actually be, with the Herald of Ice explosion kind of just becoming a little bit cosmetic due to us converting it to fire, but it'll still be very important. But the Herald of Thunder is going to be where the main mob clearing comes from. Because of this, we're going to add in Lightning Fusion, Long Shot, and an Innervate as our first 3 supports. Innervate is a really interesting support as this is a global buff giving you 35% of whatever damage any of your skills do as added lightning damage on top of it. This lightning damage isn't as extra as the wording does matter, meaning because it's not as extra, Volcanic skin will then give you 8% of it as extra fire damage, meaning you're just getting an extra 2.5% fire damage for your Herald of Ice to then make it shock more consistently. I've attempted to put an Innervate on both Herald of Ice and Thunder, and it feels about the same. It's not going to have the greatest of uptimes, but the point is it's going to be up sometimes, making your Herald of Ice even more consistent. Finally, for your last 2 supports, we're going to include in a Lightning Mastery and then a Shock Siphon because it's going to feel pretty good while clearing, given it will kill enemies while shocked fairly often, and there's no other damage links left for us to run. With this put together, you should now notice substantially better screen-wide clears, and it should just make the build feel so much more fun, especially when you get to a really dense area, you kill one monster, and you literally just see everything on screen just chain explode. This setup and figuring out all these gems and supports was really fun to me, and I enjoyed the few hours of theory crafting that this took to put together, and I'm really happy with the final result. Never in a million years would I have ever guessed that we could have been able to shock and expose in this build with 3 dragons, and that 3 dragons with its 70% more damage is going to massively outclass Black Sun Crest in terms of single target damage, while at the same time allowing us to fit the Herald of Ice, Herald of Thunder combo into our build. I am so happy with the direction this build is taking, and I'm happy that I'm now able to put the unique Allie theory crafting touch on it and truly make it the Allie version of the build. If you have any questions on this, feel free to leave a comment in the comments below, and I'd be more than happy to help you as soon as I can. I also stream on Twitch every single day, so feel free to come by Twitch and ask me any of your questions there, or if you simply just want to come by and be a part of the theory crafting and just be a part of our community with all the other cuties, I'd be happy to see you there as well. With all that said, I hope you enjoy the massive upgrades to the build. I hope you have a lot more fun with the build now, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll see you all in the next video.